Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to U.S. History Through Film, as we see today how the United States, in the early 20th century, fulfilled a dream people had held for centuries of connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. Because ever since the days of Christopher Columbus, people had hoped to sail from Europe to Asia, but the Americas had separated the Atlantic from the Pacific Ocean like the world's biggest speed bump. Ever since Vasco da Balboa had crossed the Isthmus of Panama in 1513, becoming the first European to lead an expedition to sight the Pacific Ocean, some people had hoped to use Central America as a route between the oceans. As early as 1534, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, Charles V, had ordered a survey of the Isthmus of Panama to determine the best route for a canal, to ease the transportation of silver from Peru to Spain. But that survey, and certainly that construction, were never carried out. In the late 1790s, a Scottish company tried to establish a colony and build an overland route in what they called the Isthmus of Darien, another name for Panama. But the Darien scheme failed, bankrupting many Scottish men, indeed the entire country of Scotland, leading Scotland to seek an official union with England, creating the United Kingdom, Scotland essentially selling itself to England to cover its debts in 1707. In the 1600s and 1700s, others proposed building a canal. When Thomas Jefferson was ambassador to France, he proposed in 1788 that Spain ought to build a canal there. And the Spanish explorer, Alessandro Malaspina, drew up plans to do that just a few years later. But in the 18-teens and 1820s, Spain's various colonies in the Americas began to win their independence. And they began to form plans of their own. Gran Colombia was one country formed out of the wreckage of the Spanish Empire in northern South America. It soon disintegrated into Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador, but it considered building its own canal through Panama, which was also part of Gran Colombia, and later Colombia itself. When gold was discovered in California, thousands of people rushed from the east coast to the west coast of the United States in 1849 and the early 1850s. Some sailed all the way around the southern tip of South America, a long and dangerous route. Others sailed to the east coast of Central America and then crossed overland. Some across Panama, others across Nicaragua to reach the west coast of Central America and sail to California from there. Those traveling across Nicaragua often made part of their route over Lake Nicaragua on steamboats owned by the American businessman Cornelius Vanderbilt. Indeed, for many people, a route across Nicaragua seemed the best place to build a canal, as it could link up with the existing trade routes on Lake Nicaragua. Although some people were put off by the large number of active volcanoes in Nicaragua, indeed some businessmen hoping to promote investment in Panama and discourage investment in Nicaragua mailed potential investors postcards depicting some of the famous volcanoes in Nicaragua. Either way, it was clear something was likely to happen, and just in case, the two most important powers with interests in the area, the United States and Great Britain, signed a treaty in 1850, the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, agreeing that if a canal should be built across Central America, neither the U.S. nor Britain would fortify that canal nor hold exclusive control over any future canal in Central America. Still, both countries kind of wanted to build one anyway, and in 1901, the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty allowed the United States to build and control a canal across the Isthmus of Central America, although with the condition it remain a neutral waterway, open to all countries' traffic. Indeed, there was a canal under construction in Central America, sort of. Now, Ferdinand de Lesseps was a French diplomat and businessman who had organized the construction of the Suez Canal in Egypt between 1859 and 1869, making himself and many of his investors fabulously wealthy. And in 1881, he proposed building a canal across Panama, and got many French and other investors to support him, and got permission from the government of Colombia, which in those days still controlled Panama, to build the canal. It is true that Panama occasionally was unhappy with Colombian rule, and there were a few small uprisings against them, but the various revolts in Panama, most recently in 1885, had all ended in failure. The same, though, is true of de Lesseps' company. The Panama Canal Company struggled with terrain much more mountainous than that in the Sinai Peninsula. They died by the thousands of yellow fever, and after 9 years, de Lesseps' company went bankrupt in a massive scandal in France. But a new Panama Canal Company was formed in 1894, and most of its stock was purchased by the engineer Philippe Bunau-Varilla, and it retained the rights to continue building the canal through Colombia and Panama. But they didn't have the money to actually do that. And Bunau-Varilla, who owned most of the stock in this new company, hoped to sell the company to someone who could finish the canal. He wanted to see the canal finished, and he really wanted to see a profit. And under President Theodore Roosevelt, the United States were eager to purchase that company and complete the canal. But Colombia was not entirely sure they wanted the United States controlling such a valuable waterway in Colombian territory. Still, an agreement was reached tentatively to allow the U.S. to purchase the company and build the canal, and even control the land around the canal. The U.S. offered $10 million up front and a $250,000 a year lease for this privilege. But Colombia felt that maybe this wasn't quite enough. Plus, Colombia knew that the new Panama Canal Company's license to build that canal was going to expire at the end of the year. If Colombia could just stick things out to the end of 1903, they would be able to reclaim all the land and rights belonging to the new Panama Canal Company. And then they hoped sell all that to the United States at a much higher price. Perhaps not $10 million, but $40 million. Bunau-Varilla, of course, was desperate to sell his company while he still could. So the question in 1903 is, what is next? And we can see this in the episode A Man, a Plan, a Canal, Panama, named not just for the greatest canal in American history, but the greatest palindrome in American history. This particular show was one episode of the television series Nova. This particular episode first aired in 1987, shortly before the United States turned control of the Panama Canal back over to Panama. So the year 1999 is occasionally mentioned in the movie as something happening in the relatively near future. The documentary was written by and narrated by David McCullough, and he based it on his own book, The Path Between the Seas, The Creation of the Panama Canal, which he had published in 1977, shortly before the U.S. Agreed to return the canal to Panama. Indeed, his book was quoted by both sides in a debate in Congress over whether or not to return the canal, and McCullough said he was pleased that both sides had found a way to quote his book.